Being an entrepreneur is such a leap of faith. And there's so many people that don't do it because they're afraid of the downside. There were innumerable sleepless nights. There were nights of, calling and begging for enough money to make payroll. But you know what? It always worked out.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Startup Junkies podcast. Thank you for tuning in from wherever and however you're tuning in with us today. My name is Caleb Talley, and I am a startup junkie, and I'm joined by my startup junkie co-host, Jeff Daniel. How's it going, guys?
Great. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Another beautiful day in paradise. And we are joined by our friend Lane Patterson, founder of Highway Ventures. How's it going, Lane?
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
So, Lane, we usually start these episodes by kind of trying to dig into your origin story. Tell us the Lane Patterson origin story. This is your, Marvel prequel episode.
When did you become Wolverine?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Lane Patterson story is, we'll talk about the fun stuff because there's always that middle stuff that's not fun. Actually was at Kansas State University and was trying to play some baseball and was umpiring over the summer and ran into a guy named Steve Wolf, whose son I called out in a controversial call and quelled the argument amongst the umpires. And after that, he came up to me after the game and said, "Man, I love the way you carry yourself. Do you want to come work for me?" And at the time, I was an English major. He insisted I get a business degree. So I changed my degree a couple days later and went on to work for Steve Wolf in the telecommunications space. I was a sales guy. I went to probably 50 countries over the next year of my life, Middle East, Africa, all of Europe, and kind of, cut my teeth and went from being a not very sophisticated person to a person who had to learn about the world fast. And from there, ended up in telco startups, eventually ended up in the always exciting space of local number portability. Anybody's ever changed their phone number from point A to point B? That was where I ended up. And ended up with a couple brilliant people who were smart enough to create a technical protocol that only we could do. And I went on to do that and do multiple startups and make a good career out of that for about the next 20 years. When I retired from that and sold my business, I went on to venture capital, started working for the Irish government at Enterprise Ireland. Really unique story there in that the Irish government has its own VC. It's the world's largest VC by deal flow.
Wow.
But probably very little quality there and very little return there. But it gave me the opportunity to really learn some things and was fun. And from there, then I went on and ran the corporate VC at MITRE Corporation. Also, probably a pretty prestigious and fun job on paper. As it turned out, conflict of interest and politics made it not that much fun to spend people's money. And so was lucky enough to have really run across the idea of the venture studio with that business. We would find internal ideas inside MITRE, we'd kick them out, we'd start new companies. At some point, went to the management team at MITRE and said, we'd all be better off if I was spinning out more technology and I'd be better off if I wasn't doing it here. And that's kind of how I became interested in doing the startup studio thing. And then through that process, we started looking at communities. All of our success in the studio model was in communities, whether they were physical communities or whether they were communities of like-minded people. And we started shopping the idea. We looked at Knoxville, Tennessee. We looked at Charleston, South Carolina. We ended up very close to here in Tulsa. They said, you guys should go check out Northwest Arkansas, and kind of the rest is history. It was a great fit. And that was a lot more than you asked for.
No, it's just the right amount. Going back to, landing in Northwest Arkansas, what about Northwest Arkansas? How did that kind of come about, per se?
Well, I think for us, when we're looking at a community, we're looking for a couple things. And realistically, the most important part of any of these equations is people and the opportunity to hire people. And we often say a great idea with bad people is probably not going to succeed, but a bad idea with amazing people often does, right? So when we looked at people, we looked at from two standpoints as well. We looked at local talent, and specifically, especially when you look at cybersecurity, there's a large path or a large pool of talent here. Obviously, there's the CPO stuff around the Walmart and or CPG, I should say, around Walmart. But there's also a big pool of cybersecurity, which is something we're interested in. And then the other thing is we were assuming that we'd have to hire executives from outside of the area. And so when you looked at an area that was attractive to bring people into, that people saw themselves in, that people saw themselves raising kids in, Northwest Arkansas also fit that bill. So we were lucky in that we kind of got both sides of it, good local talent pool and a place that people wanted to live.
That's coming from somebody who's been kind of looked at your LinkedIn, you like bounced around.
Yeah, most of my life in Denver. And then from there, I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, but I have worked and lived in a lot of places. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to backtrack here a little bit, but like I said, you've bounced around. You've been Colorado, Virginia, a little bit everywhere. So you're here in Northwest Arkansas now, Highway Ventures, right? Tell the listeners a little bit about that company.
So Highway Ventures is a startup studio. A lot of people know about venture studio model. It's kind of one of the trendy things. And the venture studio idea is that rather than investing in companies, you start companies and then invest in your own company. Our take is a little bit different in that we are using federally funded research. So our government spends about $200 billion a year to solve problems and to invent all kinds of technologies. And if you look in your pockets right now, Siri, based on technology that came out of Stanford Research Institute, SRI, federally funded research. All of those glass screens that we have also all created on federally funded research at Sandia Laboratory in New Mexico. There is, I kind of go on and on and on about the federally funded research that has been commercialized, but so little of it actually gets commercialized. Out of the $200 billion, I want to say there were something like 19 companies started last year, which is insane that so few were there. Now, it's interesting to look at those portfolios because it's never a one-to-one match, and maybe that's why it's so difficult. Something that was built for the Navy does a great job for the Navy, but it might not work so well in the Walmart truck fleet, even though it works great on the Navy's vehicles. So there's typically some changes that have to happen there, but federally funded research is the big difference from that. So we don't build MVPs like a normal studio might.
Yes, you take this research and use it to kind of help build companies, basically.
Yeah, we identify the problem set. Then we go out and talk to all the labs, find what technologies we can license, and then apply that to solve the problem.
Very cool. Is there typically a good indicator that a technology can be used to start a company?
A good indicator. I would say that typically I would say for us there is, but it takes a little experience. For example, there's tons of patents out there. Half the time they don't say what they mean. Half the time you see something, you think that's a really cool idea. They say, oh, the technologist has moved on. It didn't pan out. But the technology is still sitting out there in a database that makes it look attractive to you. The other thing is, for example, there's a phenomenon where federal researchers like to go speak at these big conferences, and they can only get accepted to speak if they have a patent. So they'll literally patent things just so they can go talk about it and then not do another thing. So you'll go talk to someone and say, this sounds like a really cool idea. They're like, well, so-and-so did that because he wanted to speak at this conference. He never picked it up again after that. So once you learn how to kind of navigate the labs, then yes, there's good indicators, but it's pretty difficult to figure that out.
Yeah. I feel like you guys have done a good job finding those.
So far, we had good success when we were at MITRE. We're just in the process of launching our first startup. It will use technologies from a couple different labs. And yeah, I think we've done a really good job.
That's awesome.
Can you talk about it, or is it in stealth mode?
I can talk about it conceptually.
Okay.
So it's a cybersecurity play. It's an OT cybersecurity play. So there are really two sides of the cybersecurity network. There's the IT, which is what we're used to, people on computers and phones and apps. And then there's the OT side, which is all the devices and all the equipment, whether it's a smart warehouse at a Walmart, whether it's cash registers, whether it's automated trucks or drones, or there's lots of examples here, even in Northwest Arkansas, where NWAC was recently hacked through their security system. So through the badge in, badge out system was how people got into that. So traditionally, most of the big cybersecurity companies focus on the IT side. We're focusing on the OT side. There's a couple big players there, but none of those players have built it from scratch to attack the OT side. They've always transitioned from IT to OT. So OT-based cybersecurity, it's based on a technology that's been widely deployed by the DoD. So a lot of the MVP and a lot of the proof is in the pudding is already there. And it's also based on some AI that was deployed by the federal government's Department of Energy.
Gotcha. So one of the questions I always have about Startup Studio and Venture Studio, and we're obviously in all of these spaces, we don't actively run a studio, we're familiar with the model, is can you effectively bring in an entrepreneurial team to something that's kind of been vetted, packaged ahead of time, and still have them have the passion and the drive and the commitment when it's effectively someone else's idea? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so in this case, the technologists are at least considering coming with the project.
Oh, interesting.
So the inventors have reached a point in their career where they've maybe got the entrepreneurial bug. They maybe see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Yep.
But we have had good success with business-minded CEOs who typically, I would say, have had a little taste. A lot of those people come from things like search fund situations where they've gone through the process, they've grown a company, they've made money, but they haven't made, retire to the islands kind of money.
Sure.
And so they've got the experience, they understand what they're doing, but they haven't really hit that jackpot yet. And those kind of people are really motivated to do this, and we've had success with that profile in the past.
Got it. And then also as you, and this is kind of a follow-up on the targeting, it sounds like this is applied technology where an awful lot of stuff that comes out of the federal labs and university or is federally funded is super long cycle stuff. I mean, if it's anything in life sciences, it might be 20 years before anything good happens. It sounds like you're aiming at applied.
Absolutely. So applied technology, software as opposed to hardware. Really a focus on things that can be profitable within 18 to 36 months.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And thinking about that kind of cycle, what do you anticipate that cycle looks like as you are rolling out, ventures in this kind of landscape? What does that look like as far as kind of what do you hope the impact to be over time?
Yeah, so the way the process works is you license the product or license the capability from the labs. They typically give you an exclusive license within a field of play. So you'll define that. There are some restrictions on those licenses, by the way. It was built on our government money, so you're not going to be selling it to our friends in China or Russia or Iran.
So you're saying you have friends in China, Russia, and Iran? Breaking news.
You heard it. Your friends. I said mine. I said your friends. So they also ultimately retain that. So if you would, if it wouldn't work out, that technology all snaps back. So you never actually own it, but it's a perpetual license typically. So you license that technology. You bring in the executive team. The technology in this case is pretty mature, so it almost immediately becomes a sales process. The hope is to be cash flow positive in 18 months. And then probably you're looking at, kind of a traditional venture model, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years out where you're looking for that A round. And at that point, that's kind of where we step away. When those guys come in, the assumption is they're going to want to bring in their management teams. They're going to want to bring in their processes. They're going to want to do that growth. So we're really trying to grow that company from, 0 to 1, 0 to 2. Early stage stuff. We want that growth. We want that traction, but we're not really looking for the hockey stick. We're looking to set it up for someone else to do that.
You guys end up owning the majority of the stock in it, which is, or how do you think about that? 'Cause
Yeah.
I've seen a number of different models.
Yeah, it just, so it's, I hate to say it depends, because
Sure.
it does.
Sure.
In some cases with a very mature technology, if we've got the technology lined up, we've got the funding lined up, and someone's just coming in to run the business, then it would be a lower number. If we're asking the founding team to actually do a lot, to build a lot, then it's a little bit higher number.
Sure.
But approximately 50-50 between the studio and the management team or the founding team.
Gotcha. Which is, for context for the listeners, that is way different than the typical position a venture capital firm would have, or the position that an incubator would have, or for that matter, an accelerator. I mean, that's one of the things that and partly it's the amount of effort you have to put in. I mean, there's a lot of belt and suspenders and work that you guys put in that's way different than what you do if you're a fund manager and some other kind of structure.
We're doing way more than just due diligence.
Yeah.
So it is different from that way. Though, I have heard of studios owning as much as 70% as well, which I also think doesn't work. Back to kind of the origin of the question, which is that you really want those folks to have skin in the game.
They got to be motivated.
And be motivated. But if you look at, a traditional VC-backed company, for them to have, 50% is probably not unheard of. I mean, yeah, you're right. Typically, the VC is going to take a lot smaller model or a lot smaller chunk.
Well, at a time. Over time. It definitely dilutes out. The founders end up having single digits, but the assumption is the pie will be really large by the time they get to that point.
And we had that problem at MITRE. It was before my time, but I inherited some companies where, MITRE would spin out something. They would give 3 founders 15%, 5% each. And then after 2 rounds, they're down to each 1%. And they all bailed because they're like,
feeling like a wage slave.
Yeah, it's like for 1%, I'm getting paid below market value because I'm a startup founder.
Right.
But I have 1%. It's got to be an awfully big number to make 1% make someone passionate about their job.
That's good stuff. That's true.
Yeah, well, I don't want to change the topic, but earlier when you were giving your Wolverine origin stories, you mentioned you started a telecom company and you ended up selling it. And a common theme I've seen in some recent podcast episodes is just the importance of having an exit strategy. How did you know when to sell that company? And did you have a plan set up before you started it?
I would say we had a plan.
Okay.
And when I say we, I had a business partner named Lisa Marie Maxon, and she had a plan.
She had the plan.
And I was lucky enough to partner with someone who was savvy in that way. It's even a funnier story in that we sold the business to a company called TNS. At the time they were on the New York Stock Exchange. They bought us. Literally maybe 30 days later, they got bought by private equity. And it was one of these private equity firms that doesn't necessarily grow so much as sell the parts off for more. And so again, Lisa Marie was smart enough to have negotiated some things into our acquisition that required them to hold on to us or to treat us in a certain way. So when Ceres Capital came in and decided to break out the chainsaw and start whacking everything, they actually sold us the business back for $1 a year later. Almost exactly the same business. Now, it led to a very stressful 30 days where we had to get all of our customers back on board really fast. But we actually sold that business and then a year later bought it back for $1. And then a couple years later, I sold it back to my partner, Lisa Marie. She was enjoying the lifestyle business and I was trying to shoot for the moon. And she's still killing it, doing what she's doing. And here I am shooting for the moon.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you've had a background in sales, obviously telecom companies, starting your own businesses, investing. You also started your own ice rink in Denver, I heard.
I did.
And you're a curling instructor or something like that?
Well, I have let that lapse.
Sounds like an excuse to drink beer. Yeah. Is it a real sport? Come on.
So it is absolutely a real sport. So the first myth is that we could all go up in the Olympics with curling. The learning curve from like the 0 to 80th percentile, pretty good.
I would imagine.
You could get good really fast, but the 80th to the whatever it takes to be an Olympian, the 90th, years and years.
There's some significant physics associated with those brooms, right? In the ice?
It's crazy physics. the way there's crazy balance. It's a touch thing, to throw the stone and hit the other stone's no problem. Like getting it online, not that hard. Getting it at the right speed and online, and spinning it with curve because they move that, and then getting the brooms involved. It's pretty fascinating. And yes, an ice rink. I was sick of software. I said we're going to find the worst run brick and mortar business in town. Did tons of research, and ice rinks were and still are the worst run businesses in town. We took the margin from like 2% to 10%. So, we were 5 times better than the other ice rinks in town, but it still sucked.
Still not good.
It was still not a good business. And it's very, I always call it like the beer truck factor. Like one thing bad happens and everything's gone. Your Zamboni breaks down and you can't get it fixed and you lose 2 days of ice and your 10% margin's gone. Your air conditioner breaks down and it's 100 degrees out, you lose 2 days of ice and you've lost, so you're always just one mechanical away from losing your month. And almost every month something seemed to happen. The stories we have about that place. So I learned 2 things. Don't go into the ice rink business and don't own a bar, because we had a bar there and man, the things that happened up there were even worse.
I've made the second mistake twice.
And maybe a third one. If you do have a building with an alarm, don't be the primary contact.
Kidding.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of tees up, I guess, our plane landing question. And I guess I'll be the one to do that one. But if you were to go back in time, go back before starting a business, go back before opening an ice rink, and give your younger self advice based on all the accumulated knowledge that you now have, what piece of advice would you give your younger self, young Lane?
Oh, man, young Lane was not very smart. But I actually think I actually give this advice quite a bit now, which is I think trust in yourself. I think being an entrepreneur is such a leap of faith. And there's so many people that don't do it because they're afraid of the downside. And I mean, there were innumerable sleepless nights. There were nights of, calling and begging for enough money to make payroll. Multiple of those. Calling customers and saying, hey, could you just pay 10 days early so I can make payroll? There were years of me not taking pay so my people could have pay. But you know what? It always worked out. And in the end, we were always better for it. So trust yourself, trust the idea. I hope nobody listens and says like, I went for it and I went bankrupt and it's your fault, but go for it is kind of how I feel about things.
Well, if any of our listeners do go bankrupt and they want to contact you or learn more about you and in Highway Ventures,
they do, right?
Where can they find you?
Probably the best way to find us is at our website, highwayventures.com.
Awesome.
Thanks for
we'll put that in the notes.
That's fantastic.
Thank you for coming today.
Yeah, that was
great.
easy.
Awesome.
Ecosystem builders, entrepreneurs, chambers of commerce, mayors. If you're interested in taking your economic future into your own hands, we've got a book that can help you. Creating Startup Junkies, Building Sustainable Venture Ecosystems in Unexpected Places is the guide. It's a little bit inspiration. It's a little bit toolkit. What it will allow you to do is take your economic future into your own hands and build a sustainable small business, innovation, and entrepreneurial ecosystem in your backyard. If you'd like to hear more, check out creatingstartupjunkies.com. The Startup Junkie podcast reaches over 100 countries and has had over 100,000 downloads. If you're interested in reaching some of the most motivated and engaged innovators and entrepreneurs on a worldwide basis, give us a shout.